everybody, and welcome to today's video. I've got a bit of a think piece to share with you today, and it was inspired by Skatebird, a game that I was very much looking forward to playing when it was first announced, and yet ended up being bitterly disappointed with it when I actually sat down to play it. The basic reality is I just don't think that Skatebird is a good game at all, or on any level, unfortunately. I gave it a 1 out of 5 review on digitallydownloaded.net, which of course you can go and check out right now. The thing is though, I actually really appreciated being able to play it, even though I didn't enjoy it on any level, and that's the crux of this little video essay. I do believe that it's okay, and even a good thing, if games can be bad. Not always, of course. I do like to play good games like everybody else, but sometimes having a game that turns out to be a bitter disappointment is actually a good and healthy thing. See, the thing is, we have this really weird dynamic in the games industry where, because games are first and foremost a product, the expectation is there that they must not be bad. If a game has flaws, be that many or few, the fact that those flaws can be patched out means that there is an expectation that the developers will go back all the way to the drawing board if necessary to save a game. No Man's Sky is a great example. It is a completely different experience now to when it was first released, and when it was first released it was absolutely slammed by the community for not reaching their expectations. So they let the developer know that. The developer went back and implemented over a long period of time all the features that were kind of demanded by the consumer. Another infamous example is the ending of Mass Effect 3, which needed to be rewritten to suit people that weren't happy with it. Another really great example is Final Fantasy XIV, which needed to be torn down right to its very foundations and rebuilt completely and re-released at one point. Now those are just 3 examples, but there are so many more in this industry. And once again, they point to a dominant industry attitude in the industry that if you don't like something about a game, then you can demand that it be changed. And if enough of you demand that it gets changed, then it will be changed. What is interesting is that video games are the only space where this really happens in the arts. There are a limited few examples in blockbuster cinema where a work goes beyond what you would consider to be a director's cut to be a complete remake. The Zack Snyder DC film Justice League springs to mind there. But otherwise, we don't tend to demand that filmmakers rework their work completely. Likewise, we don't demand that paragraphs be removed from books, that music be re-recorded to be improved, or that paintings get painted over if there's something about them that we don't like. Or at least if some people are making those demands, then nobody else is really listening to them. Certainly not the artists, the editors, or anybody else involved in the production of that artwork. And it's not that these people don't want to listen to feedback. They certainly will, and they might implement it into their subsequent works, but they generally allow the original work to stand as it is, whether it gets criticized for it or celebrated for it. And it's not that it's hard to do. You can definitely go back to these works and fix them as such, aside from cinema, where you are largely stuck working with the footage that has already been shot. So, for example, Zack Snyder's Justice League was really working with the existing footage, but ebooks can certainly be easily updated almost instantly. Music exists on the same cloud that games do, so you can upload new versions quite easily. And all you need to do to update a painting is have a brush and paints. We don't do this because that would undermine the artistic credibility of the work. Because here's the thing, art and creativity, really importantly, they're not science. Sometimes ideas just don't work, and you can't come up with a formula that is going to deliver the same quality over and over again. Shakespeare wrote plays that certainly were not as popular as his most popular plays. Timon of Athens isn't exactly Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet, for example. Stanley Kubrick and Alfred Hitchcock directed films that were nowhere near as critically and commercially celebrated as their best works. I say this as a fan of Eyes Wide Shut from Kubrick, but I'm under no illusions about how that film kind of stands up against 2001: A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange. I've also seen a lot of Picasso paintings, and not a lot of them, well, actually, not all of them, I won't say not a lot of them, but not all of them are all that interesting. You go along to an art gallery, you see that it's got a Picasso exhibition on, and you go, great, this is Picasso. You go in and you see the art there, and you're not always as impressed as you thought you were going to be going in. And every prolific musician has at least one album that at some point they want to disown, and if they don't disown, then certainly their fans do. This happens because art is about exploring ideas and creating discussion, and that means that art doesn't always work. Moreover, these terrible artworks that we can sometimes talk about help the art form itself develop. Artists canvas other ideas in developing their own. Perhaps they see potential in a bad idea to refine it and make it something great. Perhaps it inspires them in some way. For example, we wouldn't have the absolutely brilliant Ed Wood or The Disaster Artist were it not for two of the worst films of all time, The Room and Plan 9 from Outer Space. No one fixed Plan 9 from Outer Space until it was as good as Star Wars. And because Plan 9 from Outer Space was allowed to be terrible, mocked and derided, yes, but allowed to be terrible, and also the source of curiosity, it has actually become one of the most studied and discussed films of all time. That is the essence of art. That is 100% what art is about. Fixing No Man's Sky has denied us that opportunity. So to bring that back to Skatebird, I am glad to have played Skatebird, as terrible as I found it to be, because it was, if nothing else, the developer's creative vision. It wasn't as executed as well as I would have liked, as the person who was looking for a game to play that was really looking forward to it, but it has been, however, an opportunity for discourse and reflection. I've certainly thought about this game that I did not enjoy playing. I thought about it in the review. I'm thinking about it as I recorded this video. It's like coming across an ugly painting in a gallery. It might not be to my aesthetic tastes, but the fact it exists and that I have seen it contributes to my understanding and interpretation of aesthetics. Or to put all of that in a more kind of succinct philosophical question, if I only ever saw art that I liked, how would I know what I liked about art? How could I analyse the quality of my favourite artworks if I hadn't witnessed artworks that I really didn't like? Now, of course, I do understand why people feel disappointed when they play games that they don't like. I mean, it doesn't even need to really be said, but when I've seen a film or a ballet that I don't like, I've felt disappointed about that too. Nobody likes to experience something that they don't like on a very simple level. But a lot of the time, this disappointment comes down to the monetary side of things. And it's really people saying, I paid this much for that piece of crap, what a waste of my money. And that really brings us back to the way that we tend to look at video games in particular as products for consumption and not works of art. Even many of us that accept the phrase games of art, pull back a little when it comes to acknowledge that not every work of art needs to be good. We do say that games are art, but then we expect every game to deliver on our expectations. In other words, the commercial reality at some point does kick in, even for those of us that see video games as works of art. And of course, there's nothing invalid about that perspective. I'm not suggesting there is. If you spent $100 on something and you didn't like it, then of course you're going to feel like you've just wasted $100. I actually paid for Skatebird myself, since I wanted it the moment it landed on the stores, and I didn't have a review code ahead of release. Now I'll never play Skatebird again, and I certainly feel like as a result that the money that I spent on Skatebird is kind of a waste of my money. But here's the crux of it. I don't mind having wasted that money on art, because I always go into an art experience being aware that I don't have to like it for it still to be an artwork worth experiencing or an artwork that should exist. Even putting aside the subjective thing that something that I might not like, somebody else might like, and I might not like Skatebird, but somebody else might love it as their favourite game of all time. Even putting that aside, I'm happy to just acknowledge that sometimes I'm not going to enjoy the game that I play. And I do understand that this is a privileged position because I do have some disposable income and don't necessarily mind risking it on a game that I might not enjoy. But for some other people who are on a more limited budget, they do need to be more risk averse in how they spend their money. I am aware of all of that dynamic, of course, and that is totally fine as well. If you're on a budget, then you don't want to waste the money at all. However, the point here is that we need to understand that for the health of the games industry as an art form, it is okay for some games to turn out like Skatebird. Skatebird doesn't need to be fixed, even though it's a 1 out of 5 game. It doesn't need to be fixed. It's not what we want necessarily, and perhaps some people that were looking forward to it no longer buy it because they're so disappointed, or even refund it because it hasn't delivered on its promise. Even then, that's okay. Skatebird doesn't need to be saved. It is simply okay for it to be a not good game. Anyhow, that's my thoughts on this topic. As always, I'm most interested in hearing what your own thoughts are, so let me know in the comments. Do you think it is acceptable if you don't always enjoy the game that you've bought? And do you think that it's okay for art to be bad sometimes? Let's have that discussion. Do let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this video, please do mash that like and subscribe button. That way you will get a notification whenever I upload a new one. And if you want to support the work that we do here on digitallydownloaded.net, please do consider throwing me $1 or so a month on Patreon. You can back me from as little as $1 a month or more if you're feeling generous. And in doing so, you're supporting these videos, you support the work we do on digitallydownloaded.net, and we also produce a monthly magazine for Patreon backers, which is 48 pages of in-depth analysis and thought bubbles about Japanese art, culture, games, and everything else, really. We just published a magazine last week, and in that we have a 4-page article on plum wine and how to make your own plum wine. So we really do go wide with the Japanese culture there. If you're into your Japanese games, then you'll be interested in what we have in that magazine. All right, thanks very much as always, everybody, for tuning in, and we will see you next time.